I just made myself a big list of things I'd like to talk about, and I'll just keep going until either the list is done or I am. So here we go. The history of science fiction. I've had this for about a year. I saw it. I thought, ooh, that would be a really cool book to bring on and talk about. And it really is a really cool book to talk about. If you're interested in the history of science fiction, this is a really amazing place to start. Ted Chiang is the forward. He's a really great science fiction writer. I've got a couple books of his that I really want to read and talk about. I hope to bring them up at some point. I really hope that his last name is actually pronounced that way. But this book is really, really great. And I don't know if it needs its own thing. Maybe it could. I mean, if somebody really wanted me to special, like kind of like do its own unique thing on it, sure, we could do that. I don't know. The art is good, but it isn't mind-blowing art. That's not really the focus. The focus is a very much a beginner's guide, or so like an everyman's guide to the history of science fiction and important writers and what they did and what their contributions were, and different science fiction movements, and how they related to one another and how they influenced one another. And in that way, it's really great. A very large focus on the golden age of sci-fi. So I'd say about half of this book, which is not short. I mean, I read it diligently, and I think it was I want to say 2 or 3 hours to read it. Almost 200 pages. And there's a lot of text. I mean, it's a lot. I mean, like I said, there's some really great informative stuff in here. Some of it seems a little like just sort of like filler, like panel filler, so that something happens instead of these characters, these actual science fiction writers, just talking to each other. There's more, so there's more than just that, just relaying information. But that just helps to break up the pace it, to break up the action a little bit, to break up the story a little bit, break up the history. So it's not just literally a long history article that you're reading. And I think it does a really good job of that. It's very engaging. I wanted to keep reading. I wanted to finish the book, but I really do recommend it. If that's something that's interesting to you and you don't want to just read a lot of like Wikipedia articles or something like that, I think this is a really great way to engage with it. Really, really fun. Retailed originally for $30. So, I mean, even at 30, this was pretty great at 30. I thought it was really interesting, informative, and I kind of like was making a list of like, oh, this is okay, I need to check this writer out. Or I kind of knew about this writer, but didn't know what their contribution was. So it was a pretty good, even-handed account of classic science fiction and sort of its history. I don't know that it's comprehensive. I'm certainly not knowledgeable enough about it to know that whether it's comprehensive or not, but I think it really does try to hit the highlights for someone who's new to it or someone who's just not familiar with all the different corners of the genre. So really, really worth checking out by Humanoids, The History of Science Fiction, a graphic novel adventure. Next, we have 14 by Peter Clines. I do not have a copy of the book here to show you. I did the audiobook for this. I did a video not too long ago where I talked about books my wife had recommended to me. She wrote me a list, and this was one of the books that was on that list. And so I really liked 14. It was really good. I remember seeing this book. It had been on a list of mine for a long time. I finally got around and read the book. Really enjoyed it. Honestly, it was really great. To me, it had a lot of similarities to John Dies at the End, but I think it's John Woo. I think it's the writer for that. Is that right? I don't remember. Anyhow, a lot of similarities to John Dies at the End. A whole lot. There's a movie. I watched the movie. Actually, one of the very first movies my wife and I watched together. But I don't remember much about the movie, but I do remember the book, and it very much felt like the book. It was very similar. Although I will say that John Dies at the End, and I've read about half of the sequel. It is good. I really enjoy it. This book is full of spiders. That is much heavier on the humor, much heavier on humor than 14 was. 14 sort of was maybe about half the humor, and maybe a little bit more plausible, and takes itself a little more seriously. But honestly, a lot of fun book. It's kind of humorous that the characters in at 14 all talk to each other and they sort of refer to each other as Scooby-Doo names. The idea behind 14 is that this guy is kind of like doesn't love his job, and he comes across this sort of golden opportunity where there's an apartment that's unbelievably cheap for the area that he lives in. I think it's California. I want to say it's somewhere in California. And so he's like, okay. And he's kind of like, can't really figure out why. And he hears like some people like, oh, so-and-so like lived for a while and they moved out. He's like, why would they move out? And there's some weird stories about people living there and then disappearing or something, but he's not really sure. But he's like, you know what? I can't really pass this up. I really need to save money, and this is a great way to do it. So he moves in, and the building is full of unusual characters and, a little eclectic, right? And there's some strange rules, and there's this door to room 14 that's all like locked up, and no one's allowed in there. You're not supposed to mess with it. But he sort of says, well, I guess I can kind of look the other way, because who cares if this building is weird and quirky, because, it's super cheap. And then as he's living there and interacting with the other tenants of this apartment, some strange things start coming up, and he and the other tenants start investigating things. Honestly, a lot of fun. A really good, fun book that I think takes itself just seriously enough. It has, I think, a really great mixture of just humorous enough that it sort of the humor almost makes it a little bit more plausible, because I think anyone in the situations that the characters go through in that book would kind of feel like, is this real? And I think that line has sort of walked very carefully, by Peter Clines. So definitely worth checking out. I really enjoyed 14. So, I'm not too surprised that my wife had a good book recommendation for me. So she knows me kind of well. Okay. Now, I'm going to be honest that I picked this book originally to read and read it kind of with the thought that if I read it and bring it up, that it will garner views simply because of its name. And that's probably true. The only problem is I didn't love it enough to feel as though I could make my own unique, singular video about it, which is unfortunate. But I did like it, and that was Ico, the book. This is not a novelization of the game, but the writer, Miyuki Miyabi, I think I said that right, was a big fan of the game and sort of wrote this as a bit of fan fiction, if I remember what I read correctly, and then sort of let the developers or the creators know that she had written this, and I guess they took a look at it and said, this is not bad. Let's go ahead and publish it. And there probably was some editorializing or whatever that happened. But actually, which is really cool. And actually, it is well written. It is a well written book, and it is a fun book to read. It just didn't wow me. It's a young adult book. It sort of gives you some of the backstory and back history of Ico before he goes into the castle. It gives you the backstory of the ghostly girl that Ico is trying to escape with in the game. And I really liked it. I think it did a nice job of sort of trying to honor the mood and feel of the game, but still tell a story that went beyond just a massive book of vibes or something. It was really trying to ride that wave. She really tried to do something interesting with the story. I really did like some of the history that I don't know if she created that history wholesale or if there was some guidance there or how that exactly worked. So if you like Ico, check it out. If you don't know anything about Ico, or you don't know, I don't know, if you like young adult, maybe it's worth a time. Apart from if you don't like young adult, or if young adult isn't your thing and you're not really into Ico, then I would say you'd probably just be better off not reading it, because you're probably just going to have an okay experience, and there's probably something else that you're not reading that you should read instead. I wish I had enough energy to say this explosive, amazing video about the book Ico, and all these people who like the game would be like, oh, I'll click on this video a million times. It'd be so cool. It didn't happen. It just didn't happen for me. So another dream has passed into the mist. I read Rashomon and 17 other stories, that volume. Now, I'll admit that I didn't read everything, and that was written by Ryūnosuke Akutagawa. I read Rashomon, In a Bamboo Grove, Hellscreen, Big Nose, and there's a handful of other stories. Most of probably the first third of the book, which is what I really wanted to read. There was a really interesting sort of introduction by Murakami, where he talked about Akutagawa's writing career and how he was just sort of like very meteoric. He was a very young person when he started. And it's like it was very evident right away that he was just really had a knack for it. He had a lot of interest in French writing, and I think the Japanese novel at the time was very much kind of a new thing, writing prose. I don't know if writing prose precisely, but writing novels or writing stories like that, nonfiction stories, was kind of a newer thing. As a Western reader, to think that that was a novel concept, in that time, I just think that's very interesting. That there's not a long history of that in Japanese literature. That was not that writing literature was not exactly a thing, a career, something that somebody would choose to do. I thought that was kind of fascinating. Not to say that there wasn't any of it. It's just that it was not. It was certainly not what it was in the West. And how Ryūnosuke started writing these short stories and was very, particularly good at it. And he took a lot of influence from French writing. And in fact, he tries to sort of port these French ideas and terms into these Japanese writings that he did. It was very fascinating. He died very young and tragically. That's a very kind of a theme with some of this Japanese stuff. I mean, Ryūnosuke is not the first who had committed suicide, which is unfortunate. This early stuff is very much these sort of very interesting and very well written fictional stories. And then later on, and comes from the introduction by Murakami, later on there was a trend in Japanese writing where someone would write these nonfiction stories about themselves, like these little, like autobiographies, not exactly about your life, but about an event, like a slice of life from their actual life, and try to do something with that. And Ryūnosuke was not really excited about that, but that was like what everybody was doing. And so he had to he sort of fell in step. And that's what the second half one section of the book was. I just didn't want to read that right now because I felt like reading that would put a different flavor on the entirety of the book. I wanted to leave that mood alone and let it sit so I could talk about those stories without the influence of these nonfiction stories that are still well known and well regarded, but that maybe he wasn't as excited about. And I felt like that would maybe change my perception of his writing. So, the stories. Now, the most famous is Rashomon, but actually, I think the concept that we associate with Rashomon is actually from the short story In a Bamboo Grove. And I will say that both of those stories are extremely short, like really, really, really short. Rashomon is maybe 5 or 6 pages, and In a Bamboo Grove is probably about the same. Very short stories. Very interesting, very, very good, but very, very brief. Now, I liked both of those. I really liked Rashomon, and the problem is that it's difficult for me to talk about really much of anything about them because they're so incredibly brief. Instead, I'll talk about a slightly longer one that I really liked called Hellscreen. Now, Hellscreen is all about this Japanese painter who is not well liked. He's generally disliked, and it's told from the story is told from a point of view of, we get the impression of somebody who's like a noble in a court. I think he's like a noble in this court, relating the life of this painter and how he came to work for their lord. This painter, who is extremely skilled and would often do some unusual things to appropriately capture in his painting whatever this real thing was. He would do things that generally made people dislike him or think he was weird and creepy, but also just generally very much a person like very much people didn't like. He would do things like he would study a corpse. He would discover a corpse of somebody in the road, and he would go and he would just study it for hours and hours. Or he would paint some picture of like, I want to say some sort of religious picture, and he would put the faces of local prostitutes and beggars, use their faces for these Buddhist figures. Things that were that people didn't really appreciate, but that they could appreciate how realistic and powerful his painting was. And so the story is about this painter whose daughter is very attractive. He's an old man. His daughter is very attractive, and how this lord takes her into his service, and how the painter paints something for him, and then this lord says, what favor can I give you, as thanks? And he says, let my daughter come out of your service. I don't, let her come back to live with me. I don't want He didn't say, I don't want her to come live with you, but I want her to come live with me. And the Lord is, very angry about this, and everyone in the court is very astonished. And he keeps doing these amazing works of art for this Lord and this Lord, and he keeps asking for his daughter to be returned to him, and keeps getting denied. And it's a really interesting play because you can see that the narrator doesn't understand what you, the reader, do, which is that this painter that nobody likes in this court is probably not that bad a person per se, or at least he's very strange, and that this Lord is sort of forcing, or is interested in forcing, his advances on his daughter, and that he's trying to get his daughter back. And there's a lot of like build up in this story until the Lord requests that the painter paint a screen for him depicting hell, the different levels of hell, or something along those lines. I guess it would be a Buddhist hell. Yeah, it wouldn't be Shinto. I think it's Buddhist hell. And what happens from that. A really great story, especially because of the way the narration works, the way the narrator has his own opinions that he keeps interjecting into the story, and that he is a part of the story, which is kind of a unique thing with a lot of this Ryūnosuke Akutagawa's writing. It seems like that the narrator is sort of sometimes interjects himself into the story in some regard, which I think is really interesting. Really interesting messing around with narrative. Maybe you do or don't know that the story In a Bamboo Grove is all about this event. This happens, this murder that happens, and it's told by multiple different people, and you have to sort of try to figure out exactly what did happen. Everyone's telling a slightly different account of events. Who's lying and who isn't? So that was really interesting in A Bamboo Grove, and Hell Scream was particularly great. So I really do recommend those stories. It's just that since they're so short, I just don't. I feel like I really can't talk very much about most of them, but I do recommend them, and I really enjoyed reading that ink. And I'll probably revisit it at some point. And if I do, and I find things I want to talk about, I'm sure I'll bring it on here. In a more recent video of mine, someone had asked if I'd ever read any Richard Christian Matherson, and I knew of Richard Matherson, and I thought, well, who's Richard Christian Matherson? And I looked it up, and that's Richard Matherson's son. And they had recommended a book by him called Scars. So I picked that up as an ebook. I might pick it up as an actual physical book too. I've read a little bit of it, and I do like it. They recommended it to me because he's really known for this very tight narrative, very, very known for his brevity. Also recommended that I look at Battleground. Now, there was a TV show, I don't remember what the entire TV show was, that is basically hour-long episodes retelling Stephen King short stories from, I want to say, I can't remember which Stephen King short story collection it is. I don't think, it's not 4 Past Midnight. It's not Skeleton Crew. Nightmares and Dreamscapes is the name of the show. And there's an episode called Battleground that is based on this Stephen King story from that collection. Now, I have a bit of a history with that collection, which is a little unusual because I had read this story, the Stephen King story, in high school in a class. Our English teacher printed it out and gave it to us, and we read it in class, which is a bizarre thing for an English teacher to do, I think. But he was one of probably my absolute favorite teacher I'd ever had. I had him twice. I had him in my sophomore and senior year in high school, and it was a class that was so good that when I was stayed home sick, right, I was upset because I would miss his class. It was definitely made me go from somebody who really loved books to who couldn't go without them to some extent. So, really, just a wonderful memory that sort of resurged, and to think about it again and just think, is that really what happened? It really did. I don't know. Crazy. I didn't know that they'd ever made a TV show about that Stephen King short story collection, and that Richard Christian Matherson had written the screenplay for that episode. Well, I was able to find it for free on YouTube and watched it and really enjoyed it. It was actually great, so it was a huge recommendation that I watched it, and I showed it to my daughter, and she watched it and also really enjoyed it. So we had a good time watching that. It was really great, and there was some really cool choices that were made in that too. This the complete lack of any dialogue in this hour-long episode. It was really wonderful. I can't remember the actor's name. Hurt, I think it's William Hurt. I think is the actor, and just a really really cool hour-long episode. That's like a small movie almost. Just wonderful, really great. If you're interested, just search it up. Stephen King, look up Stephen King's Battleground from the TV series. It should come up. That's about an hour. Really good, really good. I don't know where you can get it to stream it or something. The quality was okay. It was good enough for me. It was also a really cool book that was made all about that. And I did look at it. It does look kind of cool. I'm not certain I'm ready to pull the trigger on it. I've got so many things. But it does look really, really great, and I really appreciate the recommendation. The one more little tidbit is that I thought it was very humorous, and I'm sure that this is why Matherson chose to do that episode and everything, is that his father, Richard Matherson, wrote a story called Prey. And if you don't know, Prey is a Matherson story about this woman who gets this Zuni fetish doll, and she brings it home, and she's going to give it as a gift to her boyfriend, and then she doesn't. And something happens and it comes to life and it tries to kill her. Right? There's at least, you know what? That's the show. It's the TV show. There was a made-for-TV movie called Trilogy of Terror, and that's what happens in that movie. It's one of my wife's favorite movies, and it's really great. I mean, there's three. Trilogy of Terror is a made-for-TV movie from the 70s, I think. The first two parts are pretty good, and then that last part, I think it's called Amelia, is essentially the story Prey made for TV. And it is super intense for TV, super, super intense for TV, and it is absolutely excellent. Like it is crazy. It's wonderful. I love it. Like I said, it's my wife's favorite movie. And so it's great that that story, right, Prey, that got turned into Amelia, that Richard Christian Matherson got to make Stephen King's Battleground, which is sort of an homage to Richard Matherson. And Stephen King is a big Richard Matherson fan. He said so before. So that was kind of great, and that he got to sort of do the Stephen King story. And even in the episode of Battleground, if you look, there's a moment where the camera pans up on this sort of curio shelf, and you see the Zuni fetish doll on top of the curio shelf. So I thought that was a really nice touch and kind of great. So really enjoyed the episode. Really enjoyed Richard Christian Matherson's writing, or enjoying it, and it's just kind of a great callback to a memory I have, and then that wonderful Richard Matheson story. I read a while back, about a month ago, I read Tanith Lee's Knight's Master, and then I started and I'm halfway through Death's Master, which is the sequel. This is the first fantasy stories written in her Flat Earth series. Knight's Master was amazing. I made a video on Knight's Master. I didn't put it out, and I don't remember why. I have to go back and watch, and why I haven't released it yet. I think I felt like I wanted to do it again, like I didn't do it justice. I don't know if it's worth holding on to, or and editing up and putting out, or if I need to redo it. I just don't know. Sometimes I find I'm too critical about things that especially when you're in the moment, you're looking at it, it's just so hard for me to have any distance and to tell if it's any good. And then sometimes I wish I'd given this another pass. So I don't know. I just can't tell. So I haven't done it. At the very least, I want to make those videos. Very much in line with C.L. Moore. I think that if you like C.L. Moore, that you'd like Tanith Lee. At least Knight's Master and Death's Master seem to be in that same vein. Very much like a dark fairy tale vibe. And it was just great. Amazing writing. Really, really, really liked it. So I do want to talk about those. Hopefully we'll have one of the two videos, either the old video or a new one. It's not too far from now. The other day I was thinking about a book that I'd read a long time ago that was sort of a fantasy take on Master and Commander, tall ships and stuff, right? And it was pretty good. I thought, is that worth revisiting? I'm not certain. I'm like, man, I really wish there was a good sort of science fiction-y or fantasy book that is very much like a Horatio Hornblow or a Master and Commander book, right? And then I come across in my looking at Nova, And I'm like, oh, this book is available for free on Audible, but it's only available for a couple more days. So I'm okay, and I start listening to it, and it's absolutely a science fiction, like nautical adventure type story, right? Adventure may be a little strong. It very much has like a Moby Dick-ish vibe very early in the book. But I was going to run out of time. I was going to have to either breakneck read it, or I was going to run out of time and I wasn't going to be able to finish it. So I'm going to end up picking it up and reading it, because the little bit that I started, I really liked. It started off really good. I read maybe the first 2 or 3 chapters, really liked it. So I'm going to pick that up and read it. Probably pretty soon. Probably really, I don't know, summer. By the end of summer, I should be talking about it. I mean, there's a huge delay between when I read something and when I finally talk about it. I need to get rid of that. I need to stop doing that. But that's just how it is. So now I want to talk about books that are upcoming for me, books that I'm getting ready to read or I've already started, and unfortunately I've had a few too many started, so I may have to say, okay, this book gets pushed to a little bit later, to maybe kind of not try to read so many books at once. But here's a few books that I'm reading or in the process of reading. And the first one of those is Ramsey Campbell's The Doll Who Ate Its Mother. The Doll Who Ate Its Mother. I actually did start this. I read this a very, very, very long time ago. Though I did forget immediately. Something happened very early in the book. I'm like, oh, I totally forgot. That's how this started off. Oh yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, okay. Anyways, I really like Ramsey Campbell. Somebody had recommended Midnight Suns as well, Ramsey Campbell, and that looks really great. I was really hoping to read that story in the winter, and it is not winter anymore. So maybe I'll read this one now and that one later in the year. But maybe that's my plan. I don't know. It's possible if I'm not loving this book for some reason, that I'll pivot to Midnight Sun and set this one aside. I don't know. I'm going to try not to do that, but I can't speak too much for my future self. Another book I'm going to read that I'm excited to talk about, reread actually, is M. John Harrison's Viriconium. Really great sort of steampunky fantasy story from the 70s, I think, or the early 80s. Really good stuff. Really good. Very bizarre. It kind of is to set up a series of reads I want to do later in the summer, where I kind of mess around reading new weird books, like Perdido Street Station. Perdido Street Station owes some DNA to Viriconium. Not a ton, but it does owe some to it. At least I feel like that it does. And I want to say that China Melville said something, maybe not that, but said something along those lines about how Harrison's writing was an inspiration for him when he wrote that story. So I'm definitely excited about reading Viriconium and talking about it. Although I don't know, I originally thought I'll do read each story and talk about each story individually, and I think maybe I shouldn't do that. I think I should just read them all and just talk about the entire book. That's how most people are going to engage with this. This is actually, I think, four novels. So I guess I'll just do it that way. Liminal Spaces talked about this book, and I got really interested in it. It sounded very interesting. It's also kind of pertinent because it's very much like a post-apocalyptic sort of story. And then I saw, too, that there was this Richard Corbin cover for it, and I had to have that for some reason. So Deus, Irae by Philip K. Dick and Roger Zelazny. Seems pretty interesting. Seems pretty good. Not a particularly thick book, so not too long to read. If only I didn't have 30,000 other books that I'm trying to read at the same time. I just need to stop doing and pick one. But it looks really great. I'm definitely interested in reading this. I don't know how soon I'll read it. I also have a weird thing where it's like, I don't want to do too much. I don't want to ride anybody's coattails. I know that's not, I don't know if anybody else thinks that but me, but I feel like I need some distance between that and then when I do it. So I am going to read this. I'm just not going to read it right away and talk about it right away. This book, Deus Irae, got me thinking about Philip K. Dick, who I have not honestly read in a very long time. And my favorite Philip K. Dick series is the Valis trilogy. The Valis trilogy is Valis, The Divine Invasion, and I believe the Transmogrification of Timothy Archer. I think those are the 3 books. I do not have the Transmogrification of Timothy Archer, and I'd have to get it in the same edition that came out in the 2000s because I didn't buy it at the time, and I don't have it. Gordon R.Dickson's Lost Dorasai. Now, I've never read the Dorasai series, but I do like Gordon R. Dickson. Gordon R.Dickson, well, I don't know, is he best known for it? I knew Gordon R.Dickson for the George and the Dragon, or is it the Dragon and the George? I think it's the Dragon and the George. Anyhow, which is a fantasy series and where a character goes back in time and is put into the body of a dragon. I do have something to say about that series because that was made into an animated movie called The Flight of Dragons. And it's a favorite movie of mine. In fact, it's a wonderful movie. And I kind of almost want to make a whole thing about that story and that movie, but it's not going to happen here. Anyway, that's where I best knew him from. I also read a really good post-apocalyptic novel by him a long time ago that I found somewhere very cheap and picked up in hardback. It was like $5 in hardback for like, like the not like a reprint hardback, but like the original hardback, right? That would have been on like the B. Dalton bookshelf or something, back in the day when B. Dalton was around. It was Wolf and Iron, and I remember really liking it. I know Dickson has a real talent, or everything I remember about Dickson was that his books would be very good, and there'd always be this moment where there'd be action. The action was super intense, and that book had like a couple scenes in it were super intense. That's how they were in my memory. So I've always had an affection for him for that, and I've not read a lot of his science fiction. Obviously, I have. I can't remember the names of the two books. This two book series by Dickson that he wrote that's in Barlow's Guide that I need to read. But Dorasai, I think, is also a very popular series by him. And this one was interesting to me because, for one, it was very cheap, and also it was illustrated. So it's got all these wonderful illustrations just all throughout the whole book, and I thought that was pretty cool. And I thought, okay, I'd probably like to read this at some point. I like Dickson's writing, so this seems cool. That was it. The last book to talk about today that I thought was interesting. I happened to be at this other book reseller, and just looking through, I think I was looking at the horror section to see if they had a certain book, and they didn't. And I was like, oh, okay. And the Western section was right there, and I'm like, wait a minute, what is this book here? And I found this book, and I thought, oh, I wonder if that's any good. It looks interesting. And the reviews were pretty positive, so I picked it up, and I don't know if it's going to be any good or not, but it's a Tale Out of Luck, a Western written by Willie Nelson. And it was well reviewed. People said that this was a great book. They really liked it. Now, I don't know. That could be because people who don't read a lot, maybe, but like Willie Nelson, saw that he had a book and bought it and said, oh, this is a great book. So that could be part of that. But I also feel like Willie Nelson has... I don't know. He has like some artistic integrity, if to me at least. So I don't think that he would just slap his name on a book and be like, "Good enough, put it out there and make me a couple bucks." I mean, what does he need? He doesn't. I mean, Will Nelson doesn't need book money, right? I mean, he's doing okay. At least as far as I know, he's doing okay. I would think so. I mean, he's got those episodes of Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, and everything else. All those paychecks were on it. But it seemed interesting, and I like Willie Nelson, and I like westerns, and I thought this could be a lot of fun. So. No idea when this will come around, but I don't know. It was a fun find, and I thought, oh, didn't even know he wrote this. I think this is not too old. I want to say it's 2000s up. I think it was a lot earlier than I thought. 08, 2008. So not well. I mean, I guess it's not really new anymore. It's almost 20 years old, but still pretty cool. There's Willie himself in a bar with a horse because. If you're Willie Nelson, you can take your horse wherever you want. Nobody's probably going to say anything to you. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Virgil. This is Literally Books. Consider liking and subscribing. Those things help a lot. And if you made it this far, you may as well. I mean, you committed yourself this far in. I mean, really. Thanks again. Bye.